Fire at Saratov. The night was heavy with the scent of oil and metal, the kind of air that clung to your clothes and skin, a reminder of the refinery that loomed over Saratov like a sleeping giant. Ivan Petrovich, a maintenance worker at the Rosnefton facility, had spent 20 years of his life within its maze of pipes and towers. At 45, his hands were calloused, his back stooped from years of bending over machinery, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen too many winters. The refinery was more than his workplace, it was his life, his family's livelihood, a heartbeat of the city. But on the night of August 10, 2025, that heartbeat faltered. Ivan stood at the edge of the control room, his breath fogging the window as he stared out at the sprawling complex. The floodlights cast harsh shadows across the steel structures, illuminating the skeletal outlines of distillation towers and storage tanks. It was just past midnight, and the night shift was quiet, save for the low hum of machinery and the occasional clank of a wrench against pipe. His colleague, Dmitry, was slumped in a chair, scrolling through his phone, muttering about the latest news from the front lines. "They're saying the Ukrainians are pushing deeper," Dmitry said, not looking up. "Drones, Ivan. Can you believe it? Flying right into our backyard." Ivan grunted, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't like talk of the war. It was too far away, too abstract, until it wasn't. The news had been relentless lately, reports of Ukrainian drones striking Russian soil, targeting military bases, airfields, and, more recently, oil refineries like theirs. The Saratov refinery, with its annual capacity of 7 million tons of crude oil, was a critical artery for Russia's war machine, supplying fuel to the forces pushing into Ukraine. Ivan knew this, though he tried not to think about it. His job was to keep the machines running, not to dwell on what the fuel powered. "Focus on the pressure valves," Ivan said, turning away from the window. "We've got a maintenance check at 2 a.m. Dmitry snorted but pocketed his phone and stood, stretching. "You worry too much, old man. Nothing's going to happen here. We're too far from the border." Ivan didn't reply. He couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his chest, a tightness that had nothing to do with the cold. He'd heard the stories, refineries in Tuapse and Volgograd hit by drones, fires raging for days, workers injured or worse. The war was creeping closer, and Saratov, some 365 miles from the Ukrainian border, no longer felt safe. At 1:17 a.m., the first explosion shattered the silence. It came from the eastern edge of the refinery, a deafening roar that shook the control room's windows and sent Dmitry sprawling to the floor. Ivan grabbed the edge of a console, his heart pounding as alarms blared to life. Red lights flashed across the control panels, warning of a breach in Sector 4, or the primary crude oil storage. Tanks stood. "What the hell was that?" Dmitry shouted, scrambling to his feet. Ivan didn't answer. He was already at the monitors, his fingers flying over the controls, pulling up live feeds from the security cameras. The screens flickered, then showed a nightmare, flames licking the sky, black smoke billowing from a ruptured tank, and the faint, eerie hum of something in the air. Drones. Small, dark shapes darting through the night, their payloads glinting under the floodlights before another explosion rocked the facility. "Get to the emergency station," Ivan barked, shoving Dmitry toward the door. "Sound the evacuation." Dmitry hesitated, his face pale, but Ivan was already moving, grabbing his radio and shouting for the night crew to report. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. He'd trained for fires, for leaks, for equipment failures, but nothing had prepared him for this. The war had found them. Outside, the night was chaos. Workers poured from the buildings, their shouts drowned out by the roar of flames and the wail of sirens. Ivan ran toward Sector 4, his boots pounding against the concrete, his mind racing. The drones were Ukrainian, he was sure of it. He'd seen the reports on Telegram, the grainy videos of similar attacks, precise, devastating strikes aimed at crippling Russia's fuel supply. The Saratov refinery was a prime target, and now it was burning. He reached the edge of the fire, the heat searing his face as he shielded his eyes. The storage tank was an inferno, flames shooting 30 feet into the air, the metal groaning under the strain. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the pop-pop-pop of air defense systems, too late to stop the drones that had already struck. Ivan's radio crackled with panicked voices: workers trapped in Sector 3, a collapsed walkway in Sector 5, and a report of a drone hitting a residential building nearby. His stomach dropped. A civilian area. People lived there. Families, children, his neighbors. "Ivan, we need you at the main valve," a voice shouted through the radio. It was Maria, the shift supervisor, her voice tight with fear. "If we don't shut it off, the whole place could go up." He turned, sprinting toward the valve station, his lungs burning from the smoke. The refinery was his responsibility, his home, but the thought of the residential building gnawed at him. He knew the area, three-story apartments where workers like him lived with their families. His sister, Lena, lived there with her 2 boys. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the task at hand. He had to stop the fire from spreading. At the valve station, Maria was already there, her face streaked with soot, her hands wrestling with a massive wrench. "It's stuck," she shouted over the noise. "The pressure's too high." Ivan grabbed the wrench, his muscles straining as he threw his weight into it. The valve groaned, then gave way, and a hiss of escaping gas filled the air as the fuel line shut down. The flames didn't stop, but they didn't grow either. For now, they'd contained the worst of it. Maria collapsed against the pipe, gasping. "What the hell is happening, Ivan?" "Drones," he said grimly, wiping sweat from his brow. "Ukrainian drones." Her eyes widened, but she didn't ask for details. They both knew what it meant. The war wasn't just on the news anymore, it was here, in their city, in their lives. As the emergency crews arrived, Ivan's thoughts turned to Lena. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed her number. No answer. He tried again, then again, each unanswered call tightening the knot in his chest. He couldn't stay here. He had to know she was safe. "Maria, I've got to go," he said, already moving. "My sister." "Go," she said, waving him off. "We've got this." He ran, his legs carrying him past the burning refinery, through the gate, and into the city. The streets were alive with panic. Sirens wailing, people spilling out of their homes, some clutching children or bags, others staring at the sky as if expecting more drones. The residential building was only a mile away, but it felt like a lifetime. When he reached it, his worst fears materialized. The courtyard was a wreck. A drone had crashed into the ground, its wreckage smoldering amidst shattered glass and twisted metal. 3 apartments were damaged, their windows blown out, curtains fluttering in the smoky air. A crowd had gathered, some crying, others shouting for help. Ivan pushed through, his heart hammering as he scanned for Lena's building. It was still standing, but the neighboring block was hit. "Lena," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Lena, where are you?" A neighbor, an older woman named Galina, grabbed his arm. "Ivan, she's at the school." They evacuated everyone there. Relief flooded him, but it was short-lived. "Is she okay?" "The boys?" Galina's face darkened. "She's fine, but..." "Ivan, there was a man in the courtyard. He didn't make it." Ivan's knees buckled. He didn't know the man, but the weight of the loss hit him like a blow. A civilian, caught in the crossfire of a war that felt so distant until now. He stumbled toward the school, his mind a whirlwind of guilt and fear. He should have been there, should have warned her, should have done something. But what could he have done? The drones came without warning, silent until they struck. At the school, he found Lena and her boys, Sasha and Misha, huddled in a gymnasium with dozens of others. Lena's face was pale, her eyes red from crying, but she was unharmed. The boys clung to her, their small faces buried in her coat. Ivan dropped to his knees, pulling them into a fierce embrace. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We're okay," Lena said, her voice trembling. "But Ivan, what's happening?" "They're saying it was a drone. From Ukraine." He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "The refinery. They hit it. And here." Her hand flew to her mouth. "Why? Why us?" He had no answer. The war was a machine, grinding up lives on both sides, and they were just cogs in it. The refinery, the fuel, the drones, it was all part of the same merciless cycle. He thought of the Ukrainian drone operators, somewhere far away, guiding their machines through the night. Did they know about the families in Saratov? Did they care? Or were they just following orders, like he followed his at the refinery? The rest of the night passed in a blur. Ivan stayed with Lena and the boys, helping organize blankets and food at the school. The news trickled in, social media posts from locals, grainy videos showing the refinery ablaze, thick black smoke rising over the city. Russian air defenses had shot down 8 drones over Saratov, but not before the damage was done. The fire at the refinery raged for hours, and though emergency crews contained it, the facility was crippled. Industry sources would later say it might take weeks to resume operations, a blow to Russia's fuel supply chain already strained by sanctions and previous attacks. By morning, the city was a ghost of itself. The refinery's fires were under control, but the skyline was marred by smoke, a grim reminder of the night's violence. Ivan walked Lena and the boys back to their apartment, stepping over debris in the courtyard. The body of the man who died had been taken away, but the crater from the drone remained, a scar in the earth. Ivan stopped, staring at it, his mind replaying the explosions, the flames, the fear. "Ivan," Lena said softly, touching his arm. "You can't stay here. It's not safe." He shook his head. "This is my home. Where would I go?" She didn't answer, but her eyes said enough. The war had changed everything. Saratov, once a quiet industrial city, was now a target. The refinery, his life's work, was a battlefield. And the people he loved were in the crosshairs. Over the next few days, the news spread. Ukrainian officials confirmed the strike, saying it was a targeted attack to disrupt Russia's war effort. The General Staff reported that the drones, operated by the Unmanned Systems Forces, caused explosions and a fire at the Saratov refinery, a key supplier of fuel to Russian forces. Social media buzzed with images, black smoke billowing, flames licking the sky, and the haunting wreckage of a drone in the courtyard. Russian authorities downplayed the damage, but the truth was undeniable: the refinery was out of commission, and the city was shaken. Ivan went back to work, though the refinery was a skeleton of its former self. Half the crew didn't show up, either too afraid or displaced by the attack. He spent his days salvaging what he could, repairing pipes and clearing debris, but the work felt hollow. The war had stripped away the illusion of safety, leaving him raw and exposed. He thought about the man who died, a stranger whose name he learned was Victor, a retiree who'd been walking his dog when the drone hit. He thought about the Ukrainian operators, young men and women sitting at consoles, watching their drones soar over Russian soil. He wondered what they felt: triumph? Guilt? Nothing at all? One evening, as he sat in the control room, now eerily quiet without the hum of machinery, Ivan pulled out his phone and scrolled through the news. Al Jazeera reported that the strike was part of Ukraine's strategy to hit deeper into Russian territory, targeting infrastructure to weaken Moscow's war machine. Newsweek quoted a former Ukrainian security official saying the refinery was still burning, a claim Ivan knew was exaggerated but carried a kernel of truth. The fire had been extinguished, but the damage lingered, not just to the refinery but to the city's spirit. He thought about leaving, taking Lena and the boys somewhere safer, but where? The war was everywhere, its tendrils reaching even this far. He thought about the Ukrainians, too, the ones whose homes were bombed, whose families were torn apart. He'd seen the images on TV: shattered buildings in Kiev, grieving mothers in Odessa. The war was a mirror, reflecting pain on both sides, and he was caught in its gaze. A week later, Ivan stood in the courtyard where Victor had died. The crater had been filled in, but the scars remained: broken windows, charred walls, a community forever changed. He placed a small bouquet of flowers on the ground, a gesture that felt inadequate but necessary. He didn't pray, he'd never been religious, but he stood there for a long time, letting the weight of it all settle. The war would go on, he knew. The drones would keep coming, and the fires would burn again. But for now, he had his family, his work, his city. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him going. He turned and walked back to Lena's apartment, the flowers a faint splash of color against the gray. Across the border, in a small Ukrainian command center, a young drone operator named Alina sat at her console, her eyes fixed on a screen showing satellite images of Saratov. She'd guided one of the drones that night, her hands steady as she navigated it through Russian defenses. She didn't know about Ivan, or Lena, or Victor. She didn't know about the flowers or the fear that lingered in Saratov's streets. All she knew was the mission: disrupt the enemy, weaken their resolve, bring the war closer to their homes as they'd brought it to hers. Alina's village had been shelled a year ago, her parents' house reduced to rubble. She joined the drone unit after that, driven by a fire that burned as bright as the one she'd ignited in Saratov. She didn't celebrate the strike, but she didn't regret it either. It was war, and war demanded sacrifices. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes drifting to a photo taped to her console, a picture of her parents, smiling in better days. She touched it lightly, then turned back to her screen, ready for the next mission. In Saratov, Ivan looked out at the city skyline, the refinery silhouette still smoldering in his memory. He thought about the war, the drones, the lives caught in between. He didn't know Alina, but in that moment, he felt the weight of her choices, just as she carried the weight of his. Two sides of the same coin, bound by fire and loss, in a world where peace felt like a distant dream.